There is a tree that breaks every rule of modern food systems. It needs no fertilizer, no irrigation, no replanting, no pesticide, no machinery. Plant it once. It feeds your children, then their children, then their children. For 100 years without asking anything in return. It produces thousands of fruits every single year. An oil richer in vitamin A than carrots, fiber stronger than most commercial rope, and it purifies the water in the ground beneath its roots. Every major Amazonian civilization discovered it independently and called it the same thing. The Tree of Life. Today, you have almost certainly never heard of it. That is not an accident. This is the Moriche Palm, Moriche flexuosa. In Brazil, it is called buriti. In Venezuela, aguaje. In Peru, the same. Different languages, different centuries, different peoples. The same name, the same reverence, the same conclusion. A tree this giving could only be sacred. It grows across millions of square kilometers of the Amazon basin, in swamps, floodplains, and waterlogged ground where almost nothing else survives. It does not compete with other life. It creates life. Ecologists call the groves it forms moricales, entire ecosystems that exist only because this tree decided to grow there. Hundreds of animal species depend on it. Macaws, tapirs, river otters, manatees, and for thousands of years, humans. A single mature Moriche palm produces between 100 and 350 kilograms of fruit each year, every year, for a century. The fruit is dense with calories, enough that indigenous communities across the Amazon ate it as a primary food source, not a supplement, not a seasonal treat, a staple, a foundation. The oil pressed from that fruit contains the highest concentration of beta-carotene of any plant oil ever measured. More than carrots, more than sweet potato, more than any superfood sold in a glass jar at a health store in the city. The trunk, when mature, can be split to reveal a white pith, a starchy, edible core. In times of flood or drought, when other crops failed, indigenous communities opened the Moriche and ate the tree itself. The leaves were woven into baskets, mats, walls, roofs. Entire houses. The fibers were twisted into rope that does not rot in tropical humidity. The roots filter the surrounding soil and water. Where Moriche groves stand, the groundwater runs cleaner. One tree, one planting, every need met. And then we erased it. When the first European explorers entered the Amazon basin in the 16th century, they expected to find savagery. What they found disturbed them far more. They found abundance. Spanish Jesuit missionary Cristobal de Acuna documented his journey down the Amazon in 1641. He wrote of villages surrounded by Moriche groves so thick and so productive that hunger was, in his own words, a concept these people did not appear to understand. He wasn't the only one. Explorer after explorer wrote home with the same confusion. These were not struggling peoples. They were not scratching at thin soil hoping for rain. They were not at the mercy of a single harvest. They had planted something that would outlive them, and their children had inherited it, and their children's children. The Warao people of Venezuela built their entire civilization in them, not near them, in them. Their homes on stilts above the swamp, the tree above them, the fruit falling into their hands. They did not farm the land. They had something better. The missionaries arrived with God in one hand and wheat in the other. Their mission was not simply spiritual. The Catholic Church and the Spanish Crown had an economic architecture to build, and that architecture required one thing above all else: dependency. A people who can feed themselves from a tree they did not plant cannot be easily converted into labor, cannot be taxed, cannot be controlled through hunger. The Moriche gave people freedom the colonial system could not afford, so the missionaries did what missionaries did. They gathered the indigenous peoples into settlements called reducciones, away from the swamp, away from the groves. They introduced wheat, cassava, and corn, crops that required annual planting, annual seed buying, annual labor, and they called this civilization. Within 2 generations, entire communities had lost the knowledge of the tree, not because the tree failed, not because anyone chose to abandon it, but because they were physically removed from it and given no reason to return. Cannot be owned, cannot be sold, cannot build an empire. So it was made irrelevant. Modern nutritional science has spent decades rediscovering what the Waro knew by birth. Buriti oil, the oil of the Moriche fruit, has been studied extensively by Brazilian and Peruvian researchers since the 1990s. The findings are not subtle. The beta-carotene concentration reaches up to 3,000 micrograms per gram of oil. For comparison, raw carrot contains approximately 8 micrograms per gram. That is not a small difference. It is also rich in oleic acid, the same monounsaturated fat that makes olive oil the centerpiece of the Mediterranean diet. Rich in vitamin E, rich in anti-inflammatory compounds that pharmaceutical companies are now trying to isolate and patent. You read that correctly. The compounds in the Moriche fruit, the fruit that fell freely into the hands of Amazonian communities for millennia, are currently being studied for pharmaceutical patents. What cannot be owned cannot be sold, until someone figures out how to own it. Here is something the nutritional studies don't tell you. The Moriche Palm is not just food, it is infrastructure. In the Venezuelan and Colombian llanos, the great seasonal floodplains, the Moriche groves are called the lungs of the wetlands. They store carbon at rates that rival rainforest canopy. They regulate water flow across entire river basins. They provide the only dry season food source for hundreds of species. When they go, the system goes, and they are going. Since 1990, an estimated 30% of South American Moriche groves have been cleared for cattle ranching, soy cultivation, and infrastructure development. The pace is accelerating. Developers see flooded swampland and call it wasteland. They see a tree with no commercial supply chain and call it a weed. The communities who remember what the tree is, who remember what it gave, are watching. They have been watching for 400 years, but something is shifting. In 2019, the Peruvian government added aguaje, the Moriche fruit, to its National Biodiversity Protection Register. Street markets in Iquitos sell aguaje sorbet, aguaje cream, and aguaje juice. Young Peruvians are calling it a superfood. They are not wrong. In Brazil, the Cerrado communities that border Moriche territory have begun formal grove restoration projects. Not for export, not for profit, for the same reason their ancestors planted them. Because a tree that feeds you for a century is worth more than a soy field that exhausts the land in 10 years and then demands more chemicals, more water, and more cleared forest to replace it. International organizations are taking notice. The FAO has listed Moriche as one of the most underutilized priority crops for climate-resilient food systems. Indigenous land rights movements in Venezuela and Colombia are using Moriche groves as legal anchors. If the grove survives, the community survives. The tree is still there. It was always there. The Moriche palm will never be the center of a global supply chain. You cannot harvest it at scale with machines. The fruit bruises easily. It must be eaten or processed within days. There is no shelf life, no standardization, no barcode. Modern agriculture does not know what to do with a food that is abundant, free, and uncontrollable. But here is the harder truth. The Moriche does not need a supply chain. It never did. It needs a community willing to plant it, tend it for a decade while it matures, and then trust that what they planted for their children will be enough. That is not a primitive idea. It is the most sophisticated form of food security ever devised. We abandoned it not because we found something better. We abandoned it because someone needed us to. There is a tree growing in the swamps of the Amazon right now. It is producing fruit. It has been producing fruit since before your great-grandparents were born. It will produce fruit long after everyone alive today is gone. No one planted it for you. No one is selling it to you. No one controls it. Somewhere, a child is eating it today, the same fruit from the same kind of tree in the same kind of grove, as 10,000 children did before them, reaching back across centuries to the first person who looked up at the Moriche and understood. Abundance was always here, growing in the swamp, free, feeding families for 100 years without asking anything in return. If you want to rediscover what industrial agriculture and 4 centuries of colonialism tried to erase, subscribe. We go deeper every week. What other forgotten trees should we investigate next? Tell us in the comments below.